Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Junha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Thursday, February 12th. It's a little bit after 4 p.m. Now, today, my usual podcast co-hosts, Jungmin and Juna, are not available. But today, I'm joined by NK News Lead Correspondent Shreyas Reddy.
Hey, John. Yes, that's right. I'm here to try and fail to keep John on his best behavior in Jungmin and Junha's absence.
And also to really levitate the mood here and bring a ray of sunshine for everyone to hear today.
Oh, yay.
All right, so let's start off with what happened on Sunday night. Not in Korea, though, but in Japan. Could you walk us through what happened with the Liberal Democratic Party?
Yes, so over in Japan, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's ruling Liberal Democratic Party won by a landslide. Essentially, she was already banking on this, that her popularity would propel the LDP to its biggest win in years. And it didn't just do that. It went and essentially gave the ruling coalition a two-thirds majority, more than a two-thirds supermajority in parliament, which allows them to do things that they've been wanting to do for ages, but haven't yet managed to do because they were just lacking the numbers by a little bit.
Now, you didn't say the key phrase yet,
Yeah.
which is constitutional amendments. But before we get there,
Exactly.
what I want to talk about is just how surprised I was with the result. I mean, sure, everyone knew that Takaichi herself was very popular, but it was only just a few months ago when the LDP had just got a drubbing. The last prime minister, Shigeru Ishiba, was very unpopular, and the party itself had all of this slush fund scandals going on. The people just did not like the ruling party. Did this one person, Sanae Takaichi, just really galvanize Japanese voters into supporting this party?
Honestly, it's been a combination of different factors. One is Takaichi herself. I think before she became prime minister, there had been many concerns. She was seen as someone who is, even by the LDP's standards, pretty far right, pretty extreme in her views, and she was a bit of a controversial figure in many respects. And I think that may have acted against her in the past, certainly, but when it came down to it, once she actually became leader, she presented a very personable face. It became, I think many people actually came to like her. The popularity of the government soared. Her personal popularity was skyrocketing. And that was a big factor in why she decided to call for these snap polls when her approval ratings were at an all-time high. Even in the midst of a very cold Japanese winter, people went out to vote for her in high numbers. But it wasn't just her, of course. As in many other countries, the big question was, where is the opposition? And ahead
They just crumbled, didn't they?
and a part of that is also self-inflicted. Before this, there were at least some clear opposition parties that you knew would work together. And the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, the main opposition party, was, even if it was never quite contender to be able to knock the LDP off the throne, it used to at least win enough seats to keep it from having absolute control. Now, ahead of the election, they went and joined hands with the LDP's former coalition partner, Komeito, which did not really appreciate Takaichi's more right-wing policies.
How much are they kicking themselves in the ass right now?
Must be quite a lot, because they went and merged with the Constitutional Democratic Party to form a centrist reform alliance, as they called it, and essentially they've kind of lost any real sense of identity, at least in the run-up to this election. So it hasn't been all that great for them. And we've seen this in other countries as well, certainly, when there isn't as much to fundamentally oppose the government, they can go and extend their control of power.
So in a lot of ways, Sanae Takaichi is like the mirror image of Lee Jae-myung. Lee Jae-myung, of course, on the other hand, was considered way too far on the left and just Japan bashing the entire time.
Yeah.
But as president, he's governed from the center and is actually quite popular himself. And Sanae Takaichi is doing the same thing, except that she's coming from the right.
Yes.
But, you know, now that we've discussed everything that's been going on in Japan, we have to circle this back into how this is going to impact South Korea, of course. And
Yes.
we have to go back to what you were talking about earlier, the constitutional amendments. Is that something that we can realistically expect to see going forward now?
Well, so Takaichi has for many years now been a firm advocate of constitutional revision to firmly enshrine the place of the country's military in the constitution. And the big hurdle for the LDP for the longest time was not having that two-thirds majority.
Which they have now.
Yes, which they have now. And ahead of the election, one thing also to mention is Takaichi kind of started building up her more right-wing rhetoric again, essentially to eat into the popularity of the far-right Sanseto party.
Of course.
And so that was another factor in why the LDP really did so well this time. So she, as far as Takaichi is concerned, they have the momentum to do more of that in this term. They have the mandate. But the challenge is, yes, they can initiate the process. They can initiate the process of constitutional revision and say, we want to have a more proactive military. But there are other steps that they also need to follow to actually implement that.
You're talking, of course, about the Constitution's stipulation that in order for the Constitution to be amended, there also has to be a referendum within the Japanese voters.
Absolutely. And that is something that traditionally Japanese voters have not particularly been fond of, that proposal. Now, that said, there has been some increasing support for it over the last few years, and part of it is down to regional security concerns, China in particular.
Xi Jinping did himself no favors.
Absolutely not. And the other factor, though, is not knowing when the US may or may not pull out.
Right, exactly.
So
Donald
yeah.
Trump is just being very, shall we say,
Yes.
capricious regarding his statements, regarding his allies. And so it's the same thing that's happening in Korea. We're
Exactly.
not quite sure what Trump will do. Same thing's going on in Tokyo.
Yeah, and Lee Jae-myung has been very active in trying to promote the idea of defense self-sufficiency, and
As
Takaichi
weird as
will
that phrase is.
certainly do the same as well. In Takaichi's case, it is very much in line with what she has traditionally advocated. To be honest, not just her, even her predecessors, Ishiba, Abe, Kishida, all in different ways had this on their agenda. But Takaichi is particularly proactive on this front, and now she may feel that all the factors are pointing to that. The US certainly would want Japan to be more self-sufficient as well. But that said, at the same time, the US still treats Japan as a relatively close partner in this region and has
Closer partner.
yes, and has in some ways more firmly committed to the defense presence there, to the military activities and cooperation there than it has even in South Korea.
Speaking of the United States and military defense cooperation, last year when Lee Jae-myung met with Donald Trump, the big news that came out of it was Donald Trump saying that he approved this nuclear submarine deal for South Korea. But recently, we've been seeing a lot of pushback from Democratic senators in the U.S. saying that they want this nuclear fuel processing rights to remain the way they are until they get a lot of confirmation that this will not lead to non-proliferation norms.
Yeah.
And we also have to remember that after this deal was announced last year, the current Japanese defense minister, Shinjiro Koizumi, also said that if South Korea is getting nuclear submarines, Japan should too. So with all of this going on right now, with uncertainty about what the U.S. is going to do, with Japan now saying, okay, we've got the momentum to actually make the military a part of this constitution, or enshrined in the constitution, rather, and South Korea not sure as to whether or not the Democrats will actually be able to block this, especially after the midterm elections in November. What are the implications that we are looking at when it comes to, U.S., ROC, Japan, trilateral cooperation?
I think the big challenge of the past year or so has very much been trying to predict Donald Trump. In the past, at the very least, you knew the US would want trilateral cooperation to be the big factor.
At least in the first term.
Absolutely. But the bigger challenge was always South Korea, because US foreign policy, irrespective of administration, often tended to say the same before Trump. And Japan, well, it has had one ruling party in power for pretty much for the last 6-7 decades, apart from 5
That one little
years in
brief
between.
hiatus, yeah.
Yes. So, it was South Korea where the governments shift every 5 years and completely change policies. That was the big challenge. But now we're in a very different position. We've seen new leaders come in South Korea and Japan, people who seemingly would have been at each other's throats, but
Cooperating.
instead we see them going around doing drum combos. And honestly, that has
I
been
love that
brilliant.
picture, by the way.
That was I think a lot of us woke up that morning and said,
This is
was
gonna
this
be AI.
Yeah. So it's been interesting seeing that friendship develop, but I think that is where South Korea and Japan stand at the moment. They know that for now they still have the US backing, and they want to keep it that way, but they also want to be able to strengthen relations with each other and also strengthen their own individual capabilities, because you never know what is going to happen next in a region where so much is going on.
And everything is changing all at once.
Yes, and they're dealing with the prospects of China, North Korea, Russia, all, if not joining forces, at least being on the same page. So they also want to be on the same page on the other side, if push comes to shove.
So I guess we really should say thank you to Donald Trump for making all of this happen. He's really bringing the world together.
In some ways, for sure.
All right, moving on to the next topic, also defense related, but on the other side of the world right now, Saudi Arabia was also in the news in South Korean headlines.
Indeed, South Korea and Saudi Arabia signed a memorandum of understanding, essentially pushing for greater joint research and development cooperation when it comes to defense. And this is something that more firmly entrenches the cooperation between the two sides. South Korea has been making a big defense industry push in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and other countries.
For years now.
Exactly. But what this now does is it sets things up for a more long-term, steady investment that isn't just about direct arms sales. It's about saying we're working with you more closely in the long term.
I could not have put it better myself. South Korea has been selling weapons to Saudi Arabia for years, whether we're talking about anti-tank missiles or anti-air missiles or whatever else in between. But all of those arms deals have been one-and-done deals. South Korea sells them, Saudi Arabia gets them and pays the South Korea money, and bada boom, bada bing, it's done. But now it's joint research and developments. These two countries are now actually going to be wedded together when it comes to this military cooperation now.
Yes, and in many ways, it suits both countries' needs. Saudi Arabia has been pushing for a lot more localization, as you put it. I think it was in your executive briefing on the subject.
Yep.
Their 2030 localization, Vision 2030 localization drive. And Saudi Arabia has been looking for partners for this. And that, while South Korea has been looking to get essentially a stronger foothold in the region, which is essentially its second biggest defense market after Eastern Europe at this point.
And what I'm really interested in is what's going to happen with the KF-21 program, because it's not just Saudi Arabia. The UAE is also building missiles as well. And imagine this kind of research and development that would actually be able to fuse Saudi missiles into South Korean fighter jets.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think for South Korea's defense sales, great. For Saudi Arabia's defense interest and UAE's defense interest, even better. And it doesn't just come down to the fact that these sales are going through quite easily. It is, as we've seen with this long-term deal, about enabling technology transfer, about enabling localization that works at a local level. Many Western companies wouldn't be as willing to share that proprietary information. Certainly not. And now here instead, South Korea can profit from that because it is willing to show that extra flexibility and then build a base for itself over the long term. And that creates a certain element of trust, and which, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, South Korea has in different ways been involved in that region for a long time. For example, in the UAE, South Korea has had troops stationed there for a long time at the UAE's request. Now, just in Saudi Arabia, this is a different way of going and establishing a long-term presence and an agreement that will stick around through different administrations, that is very much a long-term interest, that supports the South Korean defense industry, that supports Saudi Arabia's defense needs. And that's something that will work irrespective of who's in charge.
It's really nice not to have any moral scruples, isn't it?
Well, at the end of the day, we're reporters, John. We're here to at least say what is going on and what is going to matter.
But all of this, rah-rah cheerleading aside, with all of this weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and this joint research and development, this does also put South Korea in a bit of a collision course with the United States, doesn't it? The U.S. is also supplying a lot of weapons to the Saudis, especially under the Trump administration.
Yes, I mean, the U.S. is not typically all that fond of having to
compete.
Compete very much so. And I don't think they would have really expected this to come from South Korea as much a few years ago. But it's also been building up for a while. And you got to look at it perhaps from two different ways. One, the more pragmatic approach would be say at this point, the US also is trying to look at where it can keep weapons for its own use, and at this, also recognizing that much of the world is very much moving toward a model where they need to be able to arm themselves up for that self-sufficiency that Trump is demanding from allies. That is one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is the US government has long been beholden to the military-industrial complex. They're not really going to easily give up on the idea of being the dominant factor in weapon sales to their key allies.
If they can't sell weapons, what can they sell, really? So, okay, now we're going to make a really hard pivot and talk about South Korean domestic politics.
Yes.
All right, so this week we've seen a lot of big moves within the National Assembly. The ruling Democratic Party, they've been pushing through quite a lot of bills in the National Assembly, specifically in regards to judicial reform.
Yeah.
Now, judicial reform has been something that the Democratic Party has been talking about for a very long time, especially since the martial law declaration that Yoon very foolishly invoked in December 2024. And because of that, they've been trying to do a few things. The first thing that they want to do is to expand the number of justices in the Supreme Court. Currently, there are 14. They want to expand this to 26. Now, according to this bill that they passed, they're not going to expand it straight away. It's going to be phased. It'll be 4 in 1 year, 4 the next, and whatever it is. But regardless of how phased it is going to be, if this bill passes, and there's a very strong chance that it will pass during a plenary session at the end of this month, there's a very good chance that President Lee Jae-myung, before his term ends, is going to be able to stack the Supreme Court with all of his favorite justices.
Yes, and that's something that obviously the opposition party is not particularly keen on having. And we've seen that model followed across the board in the US in particular, but South Korea certainly, it has been a concern in the past. It's just not been on this scale. And when you're going from, I think they're appointing 12 new justices, that is a whole lot that'll completely sway the direction of the court. Now, historically, South Korea has been perhaps a little less, at risk of political manipulation of the legal system to the extent that the U.S. Supreme Court is. There have been appointments, but more often than not, it's also something that takes into account justices' qualifications, and how that approval process works is very much a subject that both parties in different ways have been keen to follow in the past. But there are a few things, of course, that one needs to consider now. South Korea is no longer quite as, let me rephrase. South Korea is now a lot more polarized than it was in the past.
Just a smidge.
Yes. And you cannot possibly see that sort of alignment on the idea of the legal good above the political convenience at this point, which we even saw when it came to confirming constitutional court justices during the martial law.
That got ugly
case,
real fast.
And that one was kind of odd because all of those nominees had previously been backed by both parties. It was just that they then realized, hang on, this is now something that will affect our political futures. And so it became a much, much bigger deal for the lawmakers.
They were playing Machiavellian roles? Really? You don't say.
Yeah, if you can't trust politicians, whom can you trust?
Say it ain't so.
But yeah, just going back again to this expansion. So from the ruling party's side, what they are suggesting is it would diversify the bench a lot more. It might produce more balanced rulings. But understandably, the opposition party is concerned about, as you mentioned, court packing to fundamentally, not irreversibly, but at least for the foreseeable future, reverse the course of how the court operates and make it a political tool.
Now, as I've said many times in this podcast, the People Power Party is useless at this point. They're not just toothless, they're fangless, they're clawless. They don't have anything. And the only thing they were really able to do regarding all of these bills that got passed in the committee, they just went home. They just did not stay in the chamber to actually vote on this. And that was the extent of what they could do. Now, granted, they don't have the numbers at the National Assembly to do anything, and that's pretty much what they're limited to at this point. But that being said, they're not entirely wrong when they talk about how this can personally benefit President Lee Jae-myung.
Absolutely.
President Lee Jae-myung, as we all know, he's got a lot of legal baggage. Now, a lot of these cases have been suspended while he's in office. But once he's out of office, that's when all those legal cases, they kick back in. But with the Supreme Court stacked with all of these justices with whom he's going to nominate, President Lee Jae-myung might not really need to worry about being behind bars after he leaves office.
Yeah, which would certainly be a remarkable change for South Korean presidents. I think over the years, there's been no shortage of that. But again, going back to the US Supreme Court, there's already a model there. Trump managed to stack the Supreme Court with a lot of Republican judges in his first term. And you know what? When it came down to the January 6th case, they fundamentally did rule that his role in it was wrong, but that he shouldn't be punished. And I think Lee Jae-myung certainly wouldn't mind having a result like that going in his favor.
Now, I don't think anyone here would be really shocked to say that I'm no fan of President Donald Trump. But to be fair, yes, he did stack the Supreme Court with a lot of his nominees. And yes, he got a lot of help from Mitch McConnell, who played a lot of dirty tricks in the Senate. But we have to keep in mind that they didn't expand the number of seats in the Supreme Court in the U.S. There's still only 9 justices.
Yeah.
Here, they were going to expand it from 14 to 26. That's a different beast altogether.
And obviously, the political factors are going to be quite significant, but at the same time, it also introduces a whole lot of institutional bloat in the Supreme Court. Now, they can argue that having more justices will speed things along.
Will it, though?
It will just create more layers.
A lot more layers. And not only have they done this, they are also saying that going forward, if people are not satisfied with the Supreme Court rulings, and if they feel that their constitutional rights have been, somehow violated by the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court will no longer be the final say, will no longer be the final court ruling. They can always take it to the Constitutional Court. And now that means that the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court, they're going to be at loggerheads with each other. So this is going to cause a lot more delay and chaos.
We're going to just see a whole lot of back and forth. And I think some would argue unnecessary additions to the legal system that kind of makes the finality of Supreme Court verdicts kind of moot. You can, if you say you're not satisfied with it and you can go and add another layer, then is the Supreme Court really, supreme?
And now I'm thinking of things like the Yellow Envelope Act. I'm thinking of the tariff deal that South Korea just had with the U.S. A lot of things are going to get challenged now. And for foreign investors, for diplomats, for Washington, for London, for Brussels, for Tokyo, they're going to be paying attention to what's going on in Seoul right now.
Yeah. And the other aspect, of course, is if you go and add this role to the Constitutional Court, it kind of shifts the Constitutional Court's position in the hierarchy, where it was very much meant for more specific situations, more specific types of cases, but now it is there to oversee what the Supreme Court does in some ways, indirectly. Whether or not that is the intention, that is what might end up dominating a lot of its caseload.
Fantastic. All right, we have to quickly move on to the week ahead. Now, for those of you who have not been paying attention to the calendar, we have the Lunar New Year coming up next week from February 16th to the 18th. And so because it's going to be the Lunar New Year, government ministries, a lot of businesses, they'll be shut down. So it's going to be a relatively slow news week next week. But that being said, another thing that we have to consider is that before the National Assembly takes a break for the Lunar New Year holidays, there will be a lot of fast-tracking of the U.S. tariff bill that people have been talking about. And of course, that Kupang saga that's been happening this week, that we have not heard from the last of it. This is something that we're going to be having to deal with for a long time to come. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this, and all of this information will be sent to your email inbox by Monday at 2 p.m. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Junho Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.